Here is our first artwork for the French Baroque and our first artist, Nicolas Poussin. Now, before I give you the title of this piece, I want to give you a definition because under Nicolas Poussin, we see the classification of French Baroque art called classicism. So, what is classicism? I know it's really weird because it has classicism, classic as in Greek and Roman, ism as in a philosophy. Miss Cortez, what? Okay, let's read it together and then we'll talk about it. The term classicism is used to define 17th century style associated with harmony, clarity, restraint, idealism of the classical world, ancient Greek and Roman. Oh, I'm missing my little parenthesis there. Developed as a reaction against the garish, dramatic, and opulence of the Baroque. Now, I know what you're thinking. Whoa, 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 okay. Classic, Greek and Roman, ism, the practice or philosophy of. Miss Cortez, is this not just Renaissance? Why are you saying it's Baroque? And why does the definition say against all of the Baroque stuff? There's no perfect answer either than to say that, well, human beings are not perfect and not even perfect. Human beings, we don't all do the same thing at the same time. And in the 17th century in France, many French artists like Poussin, they did not like what they saw in Italy and in Spain. And I'm specifically highlighting those two countries because they are all Catholic countries. And they wanted to stay with the Renaissance principles of balance and logic and harmony as expressed in the earlier Greek and Roman stuff, right? So think of classicism as a strain of Renaissance that is continuing in France during the 17th century. Does that make sense? It's the best I can do because it's the best that historians can do. If you're frustrated, I want you to point your blame at this guy. Poussin. It's him. The sourpuss. Ugh. Poussin was a leader of the classic movement. He expressed an interest in the classical world that was without all of the crazy instability and drama of what he was seeing in specifically the Italian Baroque. He argued that French Baroque should be better or grander than the Italian Baroque by continuing the classical formula of balance and logic and reason. And it's in Poussin that we see this style start to take shape. It's in Poussin's artwork that we can appreciate his approach to the classical world during the Baroque period, aka not during the Renaissance. He wrote about this in a series of essays called The Grand Manner. So often you want to hear about Poussin, you'll hear about I say you want to hear about Poussin because I don't like you, Poussin, because I like Italian Renaissance. I like Italian Baroque, and I feel like you're bagging on them. Anyways, so you wrote this series of essays called Grand Manner, and he stated that grand art or grand architecture, grand sculpture, all of it requires four things: grand subject matter or theme, grand thoughts, grand structures, and therefore a grand style. Miss Cortez, what do you mean? Grand subject matter, he said we have to limit ourselves to things like battles and heroic actions and divine beings. Keep out the riffraff. We don't need to see unimportant things like genre scenes. If it is genre, then it has to have some kind of grand ideas attached to it, like life and death and love and pain and anger. Okay, the idea was that weak artists paint weak subjects, and therefore grand artists should paint only grand subjects, only things that are worthy of them. And then this relates to the balance and logic of the composition. Equal on either side, lots of horizontals and verticals, no crazy tenebrism. Oh, that's too much drama. We don't need drama, we need logic, we need reason. This artwork here is a good example of that. Now, I will give you the title, but before we get to that, notice here that I have defined further than the Baroque, further than the French Baroque. This is classic. Oh, that's a title. Oh man. It's a freaking typo in my thing. It's classicism, okay? So this is supposed to be classicism. I'm not going to go back and change it because it takes too much time. Bear with me. I'm not perfect. So, here, this is another artwork that we'll look at briefly for classicism. But let's get into it. Here it is. This is Poussin, and the title of this work, Et in Arcadia Ego. What? Are you speaking a different language, Miss Cortez? I am. It's Latin. I'm speaking Latin. Et in Arcadia Ego. Et in Arcadia Ego is Latin for even in Arcadia I am present or I exist. What? Okay, let's talk about what we're seeing here and then we'll come back to the title. What we are seeing here are three men and they are dressed like Greek shepherds. Okay, Greek classicism. Yeah. So we have three Greek shepherds, super buff, hunky Greek shepherds, and they've come across this stone, looks like a sarcophagus, a tomb. A sarcophagus is a stone container and a body is laid to rest inside. Okay, so there's a dead body inside of this sarcophagus. We see a woman here who's resting her hand and looking down, and the men appear to be reading what was scrawled, or not scrawled, carved onto the sarcophagus. Like what? Well, usually, like, think about tombstones. It's usually like the name of the person, right? And marks their grave. Okay. So these three men have come upon this grave and they're reading who has been buried here. And one of them looks up at the woman, almost like he's asking a question. So, what's the deal? Well, what Poussin is doing here is very similar to what we've seen in the past. A lush landscape? That vocabulary word, Arcadian. Arcadian, depictions of idyllic places of rural peace and simplicity based on the ancient Greek location of Arcadia. We're in Arcadia. So just like in the Venetian Renaissance, or I should say High Renaissance, Titian was trying to put us into Arcadia because it was a Renaissance. Here in classic we're seeing a Renaissance kind of pullback to the Greek and Roman worlds, specifically Greeks. And this idea of the Arcadian landscape, this is straight up Greek soldiers, Greek shepherds in a landscape. We're in Arcadia. We're in Arcadia, and we see that lush landscape around us. Now, remember the title. Even in Arcadia, I exist. So Arcadia is supposed to be this perfection. It's supposed to be where nothing goes wrong. Everything is in harmony. And there's a sarcophagus. which is symbolic of death. Oh. Even in Arcadia, I exist, I am present. Death is present. Even in a perfect world, there is death. This is so typical of Poussin, isn't it? I told you, grand ideas, grand people. So he wants us to stay and go like, even in paradise, there's death. Ah, grand ideas, grand portrait, a grand manner painting. Ah. Okay, Poussin. Okay. I'm sorry if you like this. I'm just. So, Et in Arcadia Ego is speaking to the idea that even in Arcadia there is death, there is loss, there is grief. What we can then guess is perhaps she is death? What? Well, think about it. Nobody else is looking at her except him, and she has her hand placed over him. Is he the next to die? Ooh, perhaps, perhaps. In terms of composition, we do not see our characteristic Baroque things like tenebrism, even diagonal lines. I mean, the most diagonal we get is this little tree back here and a little bit of this staff here. Look, even the shepherd, he's at a horizontal and a vertical. Okay, this guy, nice little slight diagonal, but everybody is fairly stable. There's no tenebrism, there's no intense shadows, and I guess one of the reasons why I don't like Poussin is because he emphasizes line and has a very minimal concern for color. The colors he's using here are fairly primary. Reds, blues, yellows. Green is mixed with yellow and blue. It's a very basic color palette. There's not a lot of nuances going on. No fancy double shot silk, right? Or shot silk. Instead, for Poussin, it's about line work. It's about the balance of forms. Remember that. It's going to come up again very soon. Now, I also said I would show it in this one here. This is another Poussin. And here we see St. John, who's writing the Revelation of the book of Revelation, which is basically the apocalypse in the Bible. And here he is sitting amongst the ruins of some grand architecture. We see broken, fallen columns and ruins. And so here we're supposed to be thinking of grand ideas. We see this holy figure, St. John, who is receiving the message from God, these visions of how the world will come to an end. And he's surrounded by the rubble of civilizations from the past. So we're supposed to be like, oh, the grandness and majesty of humankind will come tumbling down. Ah, even look at how small St. John is and how big the world around him is. Again, the idea of overwhelming God and the insignificance of man. That's Poussin.